she didn't.
No, okay.
She came, she joined, I think, when we went, about 62, when we went to Italy. She joined then.
Yeah, I know she went to Italy.
Yeah.
She left in 1967, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we went camping with her, didn't we?
Yeah, in France. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Who's that?
Just saying hi to everybody.
Hi, Jan.
Keep listening.
Jan.
Hiya. Hiya, guys. Yeah.
Hello, Jan.
Hiya. Hiya, John. You okay?
Fine, thank you. You?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah,
Good.
my hair's grown a bit.
Oh, could you spare some over this way?
Yeah, I can actually, but not that much.
Very clever girl, Jan, getting all connected on your own.
What are they doing? Like, why are they on the call?
It was 50 years ago today since Nana played against these guys.
So Jen.
Hi, Jean, you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Been listening to you as you've gone along, you know, like your triathlon and things. I've just come back from mine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a year.
So you're going past me, Jan.
Yeah, okay then. I'll come out now. I'll just listen to you. Just saying hi, you know.
Hi, Jan. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Yes, yeah.
Paula from Ireland.
Paula.
I know. I've been listening to you for the past quarter of an hour. So
Oh,
yeah.
really nice.
I don't really remember you, but
No, I don't remember anyone either, but you look, we let on we do.
yeah,
I don't remember the game.
Neither do I. I know you're Princess.
Yeah.
I remember the buffet.
So do I remember, we went to a nightclub after it. I remember, vaguely remember it.
I want to know, Paula, how you managed to get a goal past me.
But you know something that I don't know that either.
Was it? No, I bet it was an own goal.
According to our lady
Near
captain,
the
we're
centre
off your
spot.
line, and I lobbed the ball from the halfway. That's going to stick in you.
I've noticed
I know
the
you couldn't have got it
organisers.
past me.
I've noticed the organisers can't get on now because we're having such a good time together.
That's why we have to have a reunion, girls.
Yeah,
definitely.
I'd love to come over to Ireland.
Will you be all more than welcome?
We got our bags. We got our bags packed.
I love Ireland. I love the
Well, I can give you 2 rooms. So there you go.
Fine. That's
We only
fine.
need 2.
Yeah.
We only need 2, don't we, Jan?
Yeah, good. So, yeah. And you can carry me home.
We're going to be put off this.
As long as we can try that Guinness.
Oh,
Very good.
and it's beautiful. It's getting nicer, girls.
Okay. Right.
I don't know.
Shall we? I don't want to interrupt, but shall we get started?
Yes.
Go on.
I'll come.
I don't want to do the boring stuff after we've been talking about the match and nights out and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
Oh, that's a funny accent.
I apologise about the accent.
It's giving me nightmares.
Usually people like the Birkenhead accent, but obviously not.
Come on, mate.
Okay, we'll get going. What I'll do, Margaret, do you know how to turn your mic on and off just before we start?
No, I don't.
I'll do it, Margaret. But then
Right, okay.
once we get going, I can unmute it for you, or if you wave, I'll unmute it. Is that okay?
Okay.
Down,
Yeah, that's
it should
fine.
be down the bottom left of your screen.
Yeah.
Try the bottom left. Is there a microphone which says mute?
Yeah.
Well, then if you press that, it'll mute it.
Brilliant, we've got it. Thank you.
Can you mute me, please?
Yeah.
You want us all to mute?
Yeah, Jan, I've got you. There we go. I think we're there. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So first off, welcome to our event to celebrate 50 years since the Corinthian Nomads Ladies Football Club from Manchester played Dundalk Ladies from County Louth and County Louth. I think I've pronounced that correctly, although people are using different ones, from the Republic of Ireland. The match was at Prestatyn Raceway on the 10th of May 1970. So the match has an incredible story to it, and it has plenty of significance, this is what we're here to talk about. Therefore, I'm delighted to be invited to chair this panel by a fantastic colleague and friend, Helena Byrne. So without further ado, I'll introduce and welcome our guests. So first off, Helena Byrne is a librarian who works in web archiving, but Helena has a personal interest in the history of women's soccer in Ireland and the indoor football leagues that ran in County Louth in the 1960s. One of the many projects Helena is involved in is the mapping of Irish football, which involves crowdsourcing any code of football with an Irish connection up until 1973. And 1973 was when the Women's Football Association of Ireland was founded. Just going to check the chat. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Helena. So anyone interested in Helena's work, I'd encourage you to follow her blog posts on the Football Collective, and we are always keen to support the work Helena's doing and try to get any updates out to our members and anyone else that follows us. Our second guest is John Carrier. So John is just on one of the neighbouring estates to me. So I'm on the Woodchurch and John is in Pensby on the Wirral. So John became interested in women playing football during the 2012 London Olympics and began his journey into the evolution of the sport in Wales more seriously in 2016. So he embarked on research into the hidden history of women playing the sport that stretches back to 1895, including the banning of women playing on affiliated football grounds in Wales from 1922 through to the emancipation in 1970, right through to the modern game. So he's been interviewing pioneers of Welsh football from past to present through a book on the subject, and John has written historical articles for Wales Women International Programmes and more recently with She Kick. So John, welcome. Delighted you can join us.
Hi all.
Our third guest is Professor Jean Williams. So Jean wrote the first academic history of a women's sports code, A Game for Rough Girls, by Routledge in 2003. Jean has consulted with FIFA, so that was A Beautiful Game, International Perspectives on Women's Football in 2007, and UEFA, so Globalising Women's Football Europe, Migration and Professionalisation in 2013. Jean consulted on the Los Angeles Declaration on Women's Football and presented at FIFA in 1999. As an academic lead for the National Football Museum Hidden Histories Project, Jean has worked with Manchester Corinthians and over 250 England international players and several reunions since 2017. Most recently at the Wembley Stadium in November 2019. There are more planned, so stay in touch with Jean for updates on the next couple of reunions and events. And some of these have been funded by Jean's consultancy company, jjheritage.com. Recently, Jean has published with the FIFA Museum in Zurich, and she's written about the global histories of women's football and studied the labour migration of women's football leaders and sport and governance structures across the world. Jean has a couple of books coming in 2021. The first is Britain's Olympic Women, A History, with Routledge, and she's also working on Honeyball's Shoulders, A Popular History of Women's Football, and that's for Pen and Sword. So Jean, welcome, great to have you here. And then our special guest is Paula Gorham. So Paula is from Dundalk, County Louth. So it's the first time I've had to say it, so I'm sure Helena is playing games with me. In the Republic of Ireland. As long as she can remember, she's always been playing football. When she was 13, she was spotted by Jerry Savage of the Blackthorn indoor football team, and he asked her to join the Blackthorn Ladies. Paula went on to represent multiple teams in the various indoor football leagues that ran in the Dundalk area in the late 1960s. She was also the founding member of Dundalk Ladies and went on to represent the Republic of Ireland 11 times in total. Paula, welcome.
Thank you.
Finally, so I'm the chair today, so I'm Dan Parnell. I'm a senior lecturer in sport business at the University of Liverpool, and I'm also the chair of the Football Collective. I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to kick off this conversation. And although everyone is on mute, there'll be an opportunity at the end for us to have a chat and ask questions, I'm sure. So the first thing to kick it off, so I don't study football or sport history too much, although I've got a very keen interest in it. My first question to Helena, but is open up to the entire panel, is why are we here? So what is the significance of this match, and why in 2020 is it important that we should reflect and consider the impact of this game now?
Thanks, Dan. It was a really great introduction, and thanks everybody for joining us today to celebrate this occasion. So just to start off from an Irish perspective, because this is quite an important match, as we've said in the blog post, for not just for Ireland, but for Britain and for Europe. But from an Irish perspective, in the Republic of Ireland, soccer only starts to come back into, women's soccer only starts to become popular again in the late 60s with those indoor soccer leagues that you mentioned in my introduction. And then Dundalk were a founding member of the Women's Football Association of which governed football in England, and was the only club from outside England to be part of that event, which was quite momentous. How did a team from Dundalk, of all places, not Dublin, where we'd have more soccer teams, become part of that? But also the Women's Football Association was only set up something like 6 months before this and didn't have any official tournaments under its governorship just yet. And it was also the first time that the Dundalk team could participate and compete against fellow WFA members as well, because you're looking at a great distance and a great expense to get across there. It probably takes about 3 days. So when the WFA did get up and running with their competitions, they weren't able to compete because of the financial impact. So there's a real significant impact on the development of women's football and putting it on the map in the Republic of Ireland. There's a lot more going, but I'd be talking all day about it. So I'll let John go on next.
As far as Wales is concerned, it was very, very significant in that the Lions Club, which organised this event, the gentleman who was involved in the Lions Club was a guy called Pat Evans. Now, I only found this out literally last night, but Pat Evans was a trainer of a charity team that he put together in Deeside called the Deeside Firebells. And obviously the Firebells were teams that joined from Deeside, from Chester, and from Prestatyn, because Prestatyn Ladies formed in 1969. And Paula will know all about Prestatyn Ladies because she played them on a couple of occasions. However, going back to this particular match on the 10th of May, there were allegedly 4,000 in attendance, and the ground was the raceway. The raceway was actually used for harness racing, for greyhound racing, and for motorbike racing. So it was actually in an unaffiliated ground because the ban in Wales was still in place. The ban in England had been lifted, I think it was in 1969, but in Wales it was still in place. And this was the second game that Pat Evans had been involved with in organising. The first one was on the 29th of March, 1970, and that was in Prestatyn. And unbeknown to me, and I only found this out last night because I spoke to one of the founders of Prestatyn Ladies, a lady called Mai Griffith, that the ground where she played was next door to the men's ground, Prestatyn Town AFC. They didn't actually play on that ground because they weren't allowed to. So Pat Evans arranged for the field next door to play on there. And there was an attendance of 3,000. Now, what's interesting is, if there was 4,000 at the raceway, all of a sudden there was that inspired people in the area, and I think that the reason they called it England against Ireland was to generate more interest in it, which it certainly did. It certainly paid off.
Thank you, John. Jean, from your perspective, why is this game so important?
Sorry, technical glitch there. I just think the Corinthian, you almost cannot overestimate the importance of the Corinthians in post-war women's football. So, and a lot of people will have heard of the Dick Kerr Ladies in the 1921, up to the ban in 1921, and know of them as a famous team. What the Corinthians do is they go on to exceed anything that the Dick Kerr Ladies had ever done. And they do that quite quickly in their history. So formed in 1949 by Percy Ashley for his daughter Doris, who was the captain for much of the early parts of the team's history. From 49 to 56, they broadly play domestic football, but then their business model changes in 57 when they go abroad as England to play in a European Championship and win in Berlin with Bert Trautmann, the famous Manchester City goalkeeper, as their interpreter. And again, if you talk to the team, if we talk to any of the Corinthians, they've got snapshots of them standing next to Bert Trautmann, and they talk about what a nice man he was. And then the tour subsequently get more ambitious from Europe. You know, they start to go to South America, and they go to South America for 12 weeks. They go to North Africa, they go further afield. So in terms of internationalizing women's football, way before FIFA get interested in women's football in 1969, Corinthians have already done that. So this is part of their kind of really pioneering role in internationalising women's football.
Thanks, Jean. I think there's two things that stand out there. One is that, and we're going to hear from today, these personal relationships and people that have got a really invested in stake that make a difference in the sport. And then the second one is when you talk about Corinthians, and I thought that Globetrotters was associated with NBA basketball, and it was a new term that we brought out, but actually the Corinthians were also called Globetrotters too. So I think there's lots of fascinating connections between things that we've seen and then this commercialised version that we see of football at the minute. But Helena, I want to ask you, can you just tell us a little bit more about the match itself from your research?
Yeah, so I actually found an original match report from the local newspaper in Dundalk, and the title was "Ladies Beaten but They Impressed," and it's actually the top news item on the soccer section there. So it's got quite a big write-up ahead of like the actual men's Dundalk side as well, and any other local soccer going on. And it was, so as John had said previously, there was 4,000 in attendance of the match. So this is quite a big game. And so it goes through what the Dundalk players were doing. And, you know, 7-1, it seems like a really, you know, it seems like a thrashing, but actually it's quite a respectable scoreline because the Corinthians were that good. They were an amazing team, and they would usually beat their opponents by quite a lot. So Margaret Shepherd did some interviews for the Irish press for today's anniversary, and she was saying they would beat other teams like 20-0 or, you know, 15-0 or, you know, 12-0, or just let in 1 or 2 goals. So it's actually quite a big feat that they did get the 1 goal. And Paula actually did have a penalty as well, but it hit the crossbar. So, you know, there was a lot of attacking play going on, and they said that they made their goalkeeper work quite hard with some good shots on goals, but they were all saved. So even though it was, so the match report kind of really brings back to life kind of the ins and outs of the day. It sounds like a very exciting match to watch.
Thank you, Helena. Paula, I'm just going to come to you next. So obviously this match for you, that you're a young 16-year-old girl joining a Dundalk team that was going on a really crazy trip over to England, Wales. Can you just tell us a little bit about the Dundalk team and where it came from and how it was put together, please?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say, if I had known at 17, known the history of the Corinthians, I would not have been on that boat, first of all. Anyway, well, the ladies' Dundalk team really originated from a 5-a-side competition that went on in Dundalk every May in the late 60s. And the 5-a-side men's and ladies, they came from all over Ireland. So a guy called Kevin Gaynor, Lord Raston, honed in on that. And from there on, the team were formed. sorry about that. And I just turned this off.
Okay.
The team were formed from the half. It was called the Half Log or All Ireland Indoor Football, and from that's when the sorry.
This is all your fans still getting in touch because they've seen
exactly
the
what it
latest
is.
media releases.
Yeah, Maeve, I'm on the Zoom. Maeve, I'm on the Zoom. I can't talk at the moment. Bye. That's a sister. It's very, very adamant. So I suppose, like when I say five-a-side indoor football tournament, I mean like there were literally thousands went to these games when it came to the final. So much so that you would not get into the Adelphi ballroom, and they would erect a television screen up at the square in Dundalk where people would go there to watch the finals. So really it was from that the Dundalk Ladies were formed, I think around in 1968 maybe? Yeah, 68. I know about 2 or 3 years before we went to play that famous match in Prestatyn, which was crazy, had we known how good they were.
Thank you, Paula. Jean, can you just, I mean, we've heard a little bit about the Dundalk team that came together. Can you just tell us a little bit about the Corinthians team and how, you know, who they were and how they got together for that day?
Well, the Corinthians team that played was the names that I've got from Margaret Shepherd, Chris Miller, Janice Lyons, Margaret Wild, Margaret Taylor, Margaret Temple, Margaret Whitworth. And again, one of the things we know about Corinthians is there were so many Margarets that everybody had to have a nickname. Pat Quayle, Pauline Quayle, Sheila Isherwood, Susan Kelly, Linda Hallam, Eileen Gay, and Jacqueline Thornton. And in essence, by 1970, this is the kind of second generation of Corinthians players. So if we think about, I've got a programme here from the 1951 Festival of Britain game, and the earlier players who were stars for Corinthians don't appear. And one of the things, and I'm talking about people who obviously the Corinthians will know, like Alice Elliott, Doris Ashley, Dorothy Alcock, Edna Broughton, these kind of names. So one of the things Corinthians did, and they will often talk about this, is you had to almost go for a trial with Percy, and then after he died sadly in 1967, there was an interim manager, and then Gladys Aiken took over, and she's going to be very important in the formation of the WFA. So this is second generation of Corinthians team, many of whom have completed that tour to South America. So very, very experienced players. And just to give, I don't think she'll mind me sharing this, but one of them told me that in some games they were so effortlessly better than their opponents that they would actually play their defenders as forwards and their forwards as defenders, just to liven things up a little bit for themselves. Again, Percy Ashley and Carol Aiken, Gladys Aiken, when she took over, would actually train them, and they talk about the system that they had of having wing backs. So it was very sophisticated tactically, as well as having a history of kind of drawing the best players to play for the team.
Thank you, Jean. So there seems to be a clear, massive difference between the Corinthians and the travelling around to the different countries around the globe. Paula, maybe just to put it in perspective, how was it? How did you cover the cost? Because this wasn't you weren't traveling all the time. This was one of the first trips. How do you manage to get the finances to cover the costs to travel over to Wales?
Well, every Sunday when we would play our League of Ireland games, before the Dundalk men's team, and we only played 30 minutes a side at those days, half time during the gents game, we would go around with buckets and tickets and anything else we could find to sell at the home matches. That's how we generated our finances to even to travel on our League of Ireland matches down to Limerick or Cork. And then we had a bit an all-out effort when we were going to Prestatyn. We held nights, like quiz nights and different events to generate the money to get, because it was quite expensive. And most of us came from big families, so our parents couldn't afford it. So that's how we generated the money, by collecting.
Was that part of your attraction to being involved in the team? Was it not just the football, but also like the social side to it as well?
Oh no, really, truthfully, it was the football for me. I'm sorry to have to say, no, I was real true blue to the town and to my jersey. I even have my jersey on today for the 50 years. But that's what it meant to me, even though it's not hammered.
Thank you.
Okay.
John, can you just tell us a little bit more then about your research on women's football in Wales?
Yeah, basically, I got involved when I watched the Olympics in 2012, and I looked at the England team that was representing Great Britain. And I think there was a player from Ireland, I think there was one from Scotland, but there were no Welsh players, which I thought was confusing. So I went into researching that, and as I opened more doors, it took me down different routes. And I got in touch with the FAW, and I asked them about the history of Welsh women's football, and they didn't seem to have very much about it at all. So I then went rooting through archives in Aberystwyth, North Wales, South Wales, all over basically, to try and find out more about women's football in Wales. And from that was how I was introduced to Helena by a gentleman from Swansea University, which was Martin John, who he knew what I was doing, and he passed over my contact details to Helena, who then approached me and got me this information about this particular game, which was interesting because around about that self-same time, I tracked down a lady called jeanwilliams, who you will see actually played in goal in that game. She moved over to North Wales around about 1975. And her story is quite remarkable in that she made significant inroads into women's football here in North Wales. She played for Prestatyn Ladies, who for about a decade were champions in the North Wales women, what was it? It was the Merseyside and Wirral Women's Football League. And they won the treble there on 2 occasions. And Jean was part of the team that won the treble in 75-76. She then moved over and played for Chester Ladies, who were in what was then the 2nd division. She was a leading goal scorer, so she wasn't the goalkeeper. She changed her the style of play that she was doing. She was a very, very consistent goal scorer. She then was part of the Point of Ayr ladies team, and I think she scored 63 goals in the first season and got them promoted. And they became rivals between Prestatyn Ladies and Point of Ayr, because they basically were the only 2 teams that really were in North Wales. But after that, she gave some information to me, which I thought I'd share with you. And it was so funny with regard to that particular game when she said she'd always thought she was playing against Fodens from Sandbach in Cheshire, who were one of the other pioneering sides of that particular era. And she said to me, we were like little kids playing in that game. All I remember, we got hammered 7-1. They were a fantastic team, ran rings round us. I would play exhibition matches for Dundalk as their goalkeeper. The game at the Raceway Prestatyn included 3 or 4 other girls from Dublin All-Stars, who were all guests who played for Dundalk. And she says they always put my name on the goal, on the team sheet to go in goal. And also during my research, I came across a lady from the Corinthians, which was Janice Lyons. And I passed this photograph on to her, but I actually wanted to talk to her about another competition that happened in 1974, but that's another story. Janice said to me that she'd previously played for the Corinthians and was playing for Juventus in 73-74. But she looked at the photograph and said, I'm the third one in from the left with the blonde hair. And it was Manchester Corinthians. And she mentioned that Foden was their arch enemies and that we were so young then, great times. Thanks ever so much for getting in touch with me. But she thought that the game was 8-1 and not 7-1. So there's a bit of controversy there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much. Jean, you've been a force behind these hidden histories, and not just in women's football, but in sport in general. And I'm fascinated by the Corinthians and how they've won so many tournaments in history before this match. Just from your take and your global perspective on it, Jean, why is this one of the most significant English teams in terms of the development of the women's game?
I'd perhaps go a bit further than that even, Dan. So just think about football history. So formation of the Football Association in 1863. And the first man to 100 caps, as we know, was Billy Wright in 1959. And he got his 100 caps playing 97% of the England games that he was eligible to play for. So, and England do not send a men's World Cup squad to a World Cup until 1950. So the FA, for their first almost 100 years of history, we were very insular, not particularly leading international developments, not particularly wanting to play against anybody else. And yet we get the Corinthians, formed in 1949. And by 1957, they're doing their first overseas tours. And shortly after, they're doing these very ambitious South American tours, invited by the Red Cross. They're feted everywhere they go. I'd much prefer the players to be talking about this than me, but just to give a sense that, you know, they raise £250,000 for charities. And the fact that the International Red Cross and these big international aid organisations use women's football as a vehicle to raise so many funds gives Manchester Corinthians a gloss back home domestically that no other women's football quite has at the time. And so, yeah, you do get Fodens going on international tours, and you do get other clubs sort of copying the model. But, you know, that old phrase, where Manchester leads, others will follow, that absolutely sums up the Corinthians. And a lot of the women were very young, but some of them did give up jobs and things to go on these tours. So they sacrificed a huge amount, and it was because they were absolutely passionate about their football. And so I think for me, Percy Ashley should be in the National Football Museum Hall of Fame, as should Doris. But so should several of the Corinthians, because if you just think of their charitable work these days and the comparators, then we should really be recognising what these women did for their local communities as well as their international communities. And the final thing I'd say about it is, you talk about leadership of women in football, which everybody thinks is a very new thing, but of course isn't. And the examples of the likes of Gladys Aiken, we've got Pat Gregory on the call. These women really led football in the UK. And again, if you talk to a lot of the Corinthians, they went and set up little teams. I know Margaret Shepherd did in her community. So there's a whole uncovered history to be uncovered here, not just of women players, but coaches, leaders, role models, raising money for charity. It just makes it a phenomenal story. Why there's not a Corinthians film yet, I have no idea.
Thank you, Jean. It sounds like you are doing some knocking on the doors anyway at the National Football Museum to get some of these wrongs righted. And I know you're working hard and tirelessly with the research. So I'm fascinated by the story, and I'm from the reading, so I'm sure there'll be more done on this. Paula, in terms of Dundalk Ladies, you were also unbeaten in the 68-69 season, and you were consequently deemed the unbeaten champions of Aya. So we
era.
Say it again. How have I pronounced it incorrectly?
You're okay.
So from the research, Helena pointed out that the team in Preston only had 3 members of the squad, to yourself, Mary Conway and Nellie McShane. So do you recall why there were so many changes to the team?
Well, number one, I'd say we had to pack our team a little bit because obviously Kevin Gaynor done some research on the Corinthians. So we had to borrow a few players, in other words, from Dublin. And actually, the other gentleman there is, after speaking to Joan Williams, she was our goalie that's now living in Wales. And we had another girl we called her Eusebio. She was a coloured girl. And 2 other, Joan Williams' sister actually played. Hello?
So we are
there, are we?
So I brought in a few extra players to help pad out the side.
Yeah, we packed it. I think we had 1 or 2 from Lurgan up north as well. And most of our Dundalk players, they were extremely young. You know, a lot of them would have been just at school, so we couldn't have taken them over anyway. But I suppose in one way we were blessed that we didn't take them, because they would have been devastated at the hammering we got. So wouldn't have boosted their morals anyway. No. We were kind of shocked ourselves and stunned because we never lost any of our games at home. But the difference in the standard of the Corinthian Nomads and us was massive. It was really massive.
Paula, I read in one of the articles that you got offered the opportunity to go and play in France a little bit later, and your dad had kind of said, no, that's not happening. In terms of this game, travelling as a 16-year-old, what was that like, and how did you react to, obviously, the result?
Well, truthfully, I can't remember. But the one memory I have was the excitement of even leaving Ireland. That would have been my first time ever out of Ireland. So that was a very joyous occasion. And I just think excitement overtook everything. So, and not going to France, when I look back, really didn't bother me too much because I was very much a homebird. I come from a big family of 11, so, and I was very young. Dad made the right decision.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Paula. Jean, I want to jump now, because one of the big things that is, I think it's caused a lot more media coverage over the past maybe 10 or 15 years, certainly from like a general sports perspective. But can you just tell us more about the FA ban on women's football and what type of impact that had on the game?
Yeah, of course. It's as we know, the ban, and John has quite rightly corrected me on the blog I did, because the ban was lifted across the UK and put in place across the UK at different stages. So the ban came in 1921 at the height of fame of the likes of Dick Kerr's, and we know that there were around 150 women's teams at that time. It was part of the backlash against the war effort that women had performed during World War I. So it just sort of seems doubly spiteful, to be honest, that women who had gone into the munitions by day and done dirty and difficult and dangerous jobs by day, who then gave up their time in evenings and weekends to play football to raise money for their local charities, should be banned from using the FA grounds and grounds affiliated to the Football Association. And then the second reason that was given was that too much was being taken in expenses by these players. And given that they'd raised loads of money for charity, that just seems doubly spiteful. But it broadly fits with what was happening with women's history at that time, because a lot of women were thrown out of well-paid jobs into uninsured trades and had to retrain after World War I. The fact that the ban stays in place for almost 50 years is really just kind of reflected of the FA. So the three things that the FA really hated, which is kind of weird if you think about where we are today, is women's football, greyhound racing and gambling. They were the three bad things as far as the FA were concerned. And even when women's football was allowed in 1969 and the formation of the WFA, attitudes were slow to change. And again, you know, Pat could tell us an enormous amount of this, and she absolutely lived through it. And I'd just like to record my absolute admiration for Pat Gregory and everything that she's done, because wherever I go in the world, I seem to sort of follow Pat around and, you know, find letters from her in the FIFA archive written in 1974, way before I ever got interested in all this, saying, well, what are you doing about a Women's World Cup? So those kind of pioneers, again, just while I'm beating a particular drum, you know, Pat Gregory should be in the National Football Museum Hall of Fame. She should be receive some kind of honour for what she's pioneered in women's football. So anyway, the ban gets lifted in 1969, 70-ish, and you get this very weird period of time when some things are official and some things are unofficial. And one of the things that shows you the kind of difficulties that the WFA officials were negotiating at the time is, if it hadn't been for the likes of Sylvia Gore playing unofficially for Manchester Corinthians and then going to Foden's, she wouldn't have been such a good player to score the goal in the first ever official England-Scotland game in 72. This blurring between what was unofficial and what was official was really kind of distinguishing at about this time. It's really thinking about women's football being recognised, but in what kinds of ways.
Thank you, Jean. And it's clear from what you've said is that you're not buying the rationale that the FA presented originally, and I'm sure there's and when you talk through it and when people read about it, there's a deep sense of frustration, border on anger for some of the decisions and what that has done, not just to the women's game in general, but just the women's experiences and what they could have had during that period. So thank you for sharing, Jean.
Can I just come back on that, Dan? Because women's football in 1921, at the point of the ban, presents one of the big what-if moments in history. So a lot of people are now looking after the lockdown, thinking about, should we have a more ethical sport when we return? But think about women's football and what it was doing in 1921. Think about what Corinthians and others were doing. They played football to raise money for charity. Most of those were healthcare charities. So what if all football today had taken the route that women's football had taken, and instead of making loads of money for, you know, people who are not always ethically responsible, what if all football was played to raise money for healthcare charities? And what if all football was played to raise money for the NHS, for example? Think about what a different kind of model we would have for football generally, and I'm talking professional football as well as amateur. So it presents us with one of those great moments, and it does show the way in which women's football could pioneer different aspects than men's football.
It's a great point, Gina. I think what you're digging at is what could be, you know, what is the real purpose of football clubs? What were the original purpose and what the purposes could be now, and how it could be a lot more fulfilling, wholesome and genuine and authentic if it was something that was genuinely for the community, that served the community. So I'm completely behind that. John, can you give a bit of background on the ban within Wales and how it differed from the FA's ban, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what Jean has just mentioned there. If I go back to the ban in Wales, it didn't come in until 3 months after the English one. It came in on the 3rd of March, 1922. Now, the difference between the two bans was the wording. The wording in 1922, and I'll read it to you, I've got it here in front of me. The council decided that in the interests of the game, they cannot allow matches to take place between ladies' teams on Welsh grounds. Full stop. That was the initial first ban. It then went on until 1939, 29th of August 1939, when the rules was changed again. And this was down to, again, it was so many Welsh teams who were playing charity matches. Dick Kerr's Ladies, that's been mentioned, the amount of times that they would come into Wales and play. They played at Ninian Park in Cardiff, they played at Cardiff Arms Park, they played on different rugby grounds and things. Rugby seemed to generate that interest for women's football, which Paula will remember because she played at Stebon Heath in Llanelli, which was a rugby ground, which was the first game against Wales. And sadly, she scored 3 goals and beat us 3-2. But that's another story. Anyway, so what happened was that the rule in Wales in 1939 had stated, no football match in which any lady or ladies take part in any way whatsoever shall be permitted to be played on any football ground within the jurisdiction of this association. Clubs, officials, players or referees are not permitted to associate themselves in any way whatsoever with ladies' football matches. So it then followed along the similar lines to England. And again, it was down to, they felt there were discrepancies in financing with regard to the money that was generated in charity matches. So it was very, very similar.
Thank you, John. Helena, what was the situation over in Ireland with the ban?
Yeah, so we saw that the FA implemented the ban in 1921 and called on other FAs to do similar things. But in Ireland in 1921, you had the IFA, the Irish Football Association, headquartered in Belfast, was the governing body for the whole island of Ireland up until 1921, when due to internal politics between the Leinster governing body based in Dublin, had there was a lot of Belfast bias in the running of the IFA. So whenever cup matches were scheduled, they were usually scheduled in Belfast, and replays then usually meant you played the second match in the opposition's team grounds, but then Dublin basically. But they didn't, they scheduled the matches again for Belfast. So this was kind of, with all Belfast bias, there was a lot of internal politics going on, and there was a split in 1921 in the governing bodies for men's football. So there's quite a lot going on there. And then also when we look at women's football, there still hasn't been any extensive history done yet of women's football on the island of Ireland, but we don't think it was as popular in all over the island as it was in the rest of Britain. If you saw in, you know, how it was organised in England and in Scotland, because Ireland was largely an agricultural society. So traditionally soccer is seen as an urban sport, except for the work on Conor Curran has done has shown that there, even in rural Donegal, there was soccer being organised in the grassroots level. So, but until these gaps are filled in our history, we won't really know the extent of how popular women's football was at the time. So it wasn't a high priority on either the IFA or the FAI, the Football Association of Ireland, that was formed in Dublin, because both organisations were for a number of years fighting over jurisdiction for the whole island of Ireland. And it took a number of years. I think it was more when the FAI got recognised by FIFA that they kind of gave up jurisdiction over the 6 counties in the north. So there was a lot of politics going on for a couple of years. But there was one big key point that's come out of some research. So myself and a few other researchers have come together. So Martin J. Moore and Stuart Gibbs and Michael Kilty and Gerald Farrell have come together to do this Mapping Irish Football project that you mentioned in my introduction. And so we're just trying to collect all the newspaper citations of any reference to women and football from whatever date period up until 1973, when the Women's Football Association of Ireland was formed. And so this will hopefully help to fill some of those gaps. But one key thing that has come up during the project is the match in 1927 between when Rutherglen, a Scottish team, went on tour of Ireland, and they played a Dublin team in 1927, and that match was played in Milltown, which was the home of Shamrock Rovers, an affiliated football club. So we don't think that they did have a ban. But in the Republic of Ireland, there doesn't seem to be much references to women's soccer after 1927, soon after that, around early 30s, because in the Republic of Ireland, we got a very conservative government. They brought in legislation to, you know, to actually kind of dictated what kind of jobs women could apply for. And then in 1939, then we had the Irish Constitution, which stated that women's place was in the home, and the state would endeavour to do whatever they could to ensure that. And that's still in our Constitution. So, you know, women's issue in the work, you know, jobs options in the workplaces was kind of decimated until the 1960s, when youth employment started to come up and more women started work. And then they got introduced to organised football through the indoor soccer leagues in the workplaces. So whereas in Northern Ireland, it's completely different trajectory for women's football, where there's more kind of industrialised workplaces, and women weren't discriminated against in joining the workplace, so continue to play soccer. So we just kind of really need an extensive history done of women's soccer in Ireland to really understand the impact of the development of the game, and to see if this ban did have it, that the FA were pushing, had any influence on the governing bodies running men's soccer.
Thanks, Helena. I think that brief insight offers us more questions and definitely more challenges to, not challenges just in the past, but challenges in the present that need to be dealt with and challenged effectively to improve the situation, not just within football and sport, but within society too. So really interesting. Paula, I'm going to bring it back to the match and talk about potentially two key people around the game. So one Irish newspaper refers to the Welsh officials being so impressed with the Dundalk Ladies that they'd like to invite them back to play Wales at Prestatyn. So this was likely to be Eddie Lloyd, who was then the manager of Prestatyn Ladies, and who John mentioned before, Pat Evans, their trainer, who was a fireman for Deeside, but also helped raise money for local charities by organising games as the manager of Deeside Firebells and Prestatyn Ladies. So Pat was also a referee in the Cheshire Men's League, as well as a linesman in the Football League. But do you recall meeting either of these gentlemen during your visit?
Truthfully, I don't. The only guy I remember was Eddie Lloyd. Yes, I remember he was the manager of the Prestatyn team when I even played against him. He was the only one I can genuinely remember, because he was quite funny. But I'm sure all the other gentlemen were as well. No, I don't is the answer, Danny.
Okay, thanks, Paula. Thank you. Helena, just jump in. Why is it taking 50 years for the story to come to light in any great detail?
Yeah, well, I've been always interested in women's football in Ireland, and then I discovered locally that there was these indoor soccer leagues running, and that was it seemed to be a key point in this development of contemporary women's game in soccer, but also Gaelic football as well. Because a lot out of these indoor leagues form Gaelic teams, outdoor Gaelic teams, and outdoor soccer teams like the Dundalk Ladies. And but when I started researching, I realised that the men were also really interested. It was kind of like a forgotten era of history, whereas because the GAA, which was the dominant sport in Ireland, had a ban on their members playing foreign sports, and it wasn't lifted to the early 70s. So, but there was all these GAA players playing indoor football, which was more like soccer than it was Gaelic. So it was quite an interesting period of Irish sporting history. But through that research, we were supposed to have an exhibition opening in Dundalk, in the Louth County Museum, Dundalk, on the indoor soccer leagues in the county. And through interviewing former players, I met Paula and a few other former Dundalk Ladies members, and they'd been doing, one of the members of the team had been doing some house cleaning and found the original programme, and that's how they kind of remembered the match and the dates and stuff like that. And I got interested in it, and then I started researching it and realising it was coming up to the 50-year anniversary of it this year, and also just looking into the history of the team. So Kevin and Nan Gaynor, husband and wife team that managed it, really inspirational and trailblazers for getting soccer on the map in Ireland, and being part of the WFA when it was founded as well. So it just really kind of got into researching them, and then through that, it's 50 years. There's a lot of 50 years coming up around now. So last year we had 50 years since the WFA was formed. This year we've got 50 years since this match. And then soon we're going to have 50 years since the other home nations and the Republic of Ireland formed their own women's football governing bodies as well. So that's coming up in the next few years. And so it's just really important that we mark this occasion while some of the players are still with us, because when we go back to the 1927 game, in Dublin. That was a really important game, but there's no records except for the few newspaper clippings that we've got. And it's really important that we start to document this history while we can and fill the gaps, because it's a common issue in all women's sports and pastimes, but a lot of women's ways of life is not documented in books and in other secondary sources. So we kind of really need to record it now before it's too late.
Brilliant. And Helena needs people like you just banging the drum and passionately seeking out this info. So great. Paula, Helena mentioned two people. Well, you mentioned Kevin and Nan Gaynor, along with someone else who stands out in some of the stories as Paddy Cannon. Can you remember their involvement in the day and the match?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Kevin, actually, he was the founder member of the Dundalk Ladies team, and well, I remember distinctly going over on the boat and how excited he was, and even a bit agitated about what was going to happen. But he achieved something by that game. He achieved, and he showed the men's FA that, you know, women were valuable. They were good footballers. They could play football, even though the other gentleman, sorry, just go back. The other gentleman that you mentioned there was Paddy Karen, and I just want to tell you something that we celebrated our 50 years about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago roughly. We celebrated early, even though it was in 1970 the game was, and I'm glad we did, because two of our members already has passed on. Paddy Karen has passed on since that, and a lady called Madge Martin. So it was very important that we celebrated early. We didn't know now, we knew Paddy was very sick, but Madge died quite suddenly in the end. Yeah, I suppose Kevin Gaynor and Nan would be the two people that would stand out in my memory, even as a young person, because before I went on that trip, many's a night was spent over a cup of tea in Kevin and Nan's house, trying to organise where we were going to get the money, how we were going to do it, how we travelled, who we get to pack the team a little bit, which we did. And yeah, I have nothing but fond memories of that match.
Thank you, Paula. Helena, have you got a question? No. Okay. Okay, no worries. You did put your hand up. I'm sorry to hear that, Paula, about the news. And I'm fascinated by the relationships and social connections that kind of...
Let's say something, Daniel. Going back to the Dundalk team, we got more sponsorships for our reunion than we did when we were playing. I mean, we got literally thousands of euros to organise ourselves for parties and dinners and celebrations and travelling to Dublin to meet the president. So it's amazing how things have turned around, like. But in those days, we couldn't get any money.
And in terms of yourself and the rest of the team, have you been involved in anything else to build on that momentum around reunions and recreating some of the
Yeah, we decided we'd meet up once a month. After that occasion, after the celebrations in Dublin, and but then obviously things happened. I had to have surgery. Some of the other girls had their own issues. There was family deaths, and it kind of went by the wayside a little bit, as it does. And then the COVID-19 didn't help either. But they're all notified about what's going on and how it's been highlighted. We're in a massive debt of gratitude to the ladies, Jean and Helena, and I forget the other guy I had him written down there. Daniel Parnell, that's yourself, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and John Carrier, that's it. We owe them a debt of gratitude from the Dundalk Ladies.
Well, now that I think we, not speaking on behalf of the group, we probably feel the opposite way around to you, and the other players that are in the group. I guess now that you're an expert on Zoom, you can maybe get regular reconnects with the team.
Well, I definitely hope to meet up with the girl I used to write. I think her name was Kathy Cousins or something, and I think that's going to happen. And I think Helena has been a rock to me anyway, you know, in all the research and helping me through all of this, even getting me set up with Zoom. So I have nothing but admiration for her.
That's lovely. Thank you. It's lovely to hear, Helena. So, I mean, separate question then. Sorry, is there a question? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Patricia. I've got the our cup competition, which this year would have been 50 years old, but of course we don't know what's going to happen. And I see from the participants that it was a Manchester Nomads and Manchester Corinthians. And I just wondered, because I don't know, maybe John does, what the difference between the Nomads and the Corinthians was. Because this was advertised, was it not, the match we're celebrating today, as Nomads versus Dundalk?
It was actually England versus Ireland, believe it or believe it not.
Yeah.
That was the heading on the poster.
Yeah, but in real terms,
It was
was it Manchester Nomads or was it Manchester Corinthians?
It was Corinthian Nomads versus the Dundalk Ladies.
So you joined together?
Nomads were the Corinthians' second team.
The reserve team.
Right. Thank you.
Because they developed this touring format.
Right.
So they would, when they went to South America, they did play against some South American teams. And I've got very many stories to tell you about that. But also where there was not opposition, they had their own second team. I believe, and I'm sure the players will put me right on this, I believe in the early 50s, the second team were called Dynamos, and then it became Nomads, because insofar as I'm aware, both teams had their own song.
No, it's fine, thank you. I was just confused because from the WFA's point of view, I think we only had in membership Manchester Corinthians.
Okay,
yeah,
brilliant.
I believe that was the sort of umbrella club underneath which sat Nomads.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jean. Okay, I've just got a couple of more questions before we round up for today. I guess to Helena, Jean and John, just one of you just could step into this. Why is it that people are so interested in women's football research projects at the minute? And is there a spike in interest?
Yeah, I would definitely say that there is an interest in women's football. What's interesting is that a lot of it is coming from academia side, which is a good thing. I think personally it should be something that should be taught at an early age, even at school, about the equality with regard to boys and girls playing football. Because in Wales, for example, they can play up to the age of under 16. And in England, I think they tested it up until under 19s. But I think there's been some controversy over that one anyway. But it's just teaching them the history of that period, those periods. I think it's something that is possibly something that they could put into the curriculum. That's just from my point of view.
Thank you, John. If I just spun this out, Jean, and how does this work intersect with the interdisciplinary stuff that you're interested in around aging, memory, and strategies to counteract loneliness and social isolation that is really important within society at the minute?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I mean, the other thing I would like to say just off the back of John's comments before I answer that is, you know, a big thank you to the non-academic historians. So I can see that Steve Bolton's on the call. I know Daniel Mooney's on the call, and a number of other people who have been very involved in researching women's football. And again, go back to Gail Newsham. I couldn't personally have done what I have done without Gail's input, and I know Patty's doing her own history of the WFA. So it's really important, I think, that we work together because there's plenty of stuff out there and there are plenty of really interesting stories. The reason that I got so involved in the reunions, so interested in the reunions, to some extent is inspired by Gail and what she did with the Dick Kerrs. because of course she got them together when they'd already lost quite a few players, and many of the players were aging. And if we think about strategies to counter social isolation and in older populations, it's really bad actually when you look at the provision for women, because if you look at a lot of the work around older female groups, you know, they're offered a sing-along and a game of bingo, which personally would be my idea of hell. I don't know about anybody else. Whereas if we talk about football, then as you've seen, I could quite possibly talk about football all day. So can many of these players, and the players have got such fantastic stories. So you get things like the Sporting Memories charity that is set up to talk about sport, and it's really aimed at men. If you look at most of the men, of the people who go to the groups, it's men, and it's organised by men and for men, and a lot of the resources that are put out are very male. And yet, as you've seen today in our little preamble, once we get Paula talking to the two Margarets and Jan, you know, it's just endlessly kind of entertaining, and that's the sort of thing that we should be promoting, and that's the value of these reunions. So the National Football Museum and Belinda Scarlett organised the first one, but then there was a loss of impetus and a loss of kind of financial aid towards that. So I do need to talk to Paula to see how she got all her thousands of euros, because I'd like to tap into some of that. But we need to keep going, because the oldest player at the Corinthians reunion was, I think, Alice Elliott. I think she's 86 now, and not many people know Alice's story, and it's an amazing story, and it's one of many. So these reunions and the stories that come from them are absolutely key, because they're also part of our contemporary history. These players are still with us, and we can get access to their stories, and that's exactly what we should be doing. And I've been pretty disappointed, I have to say, by the newspapers, because every national newspaper in the UK now has a women's football correspondent. They're mainly young reporters at the very beginning of their careers, and they think that the only story to tell about women's football is one of progress. And actually, if you talk to Paula and the Margarets and Jan and to Pat, the things that people think they're pioneering now probably were already pioneered generations ago, or have their origins in something that happened 50, 60 years ago. So in the lockdown, I'd have expected more historical stories about women's football, and they just haven't been done. And where they have been done, they've not been done in any particular depth. So it's a hugely under-researched area.
Thank you, Jean. I think without doubt there's real opportunities to learn from the past, but obviously there's obviously lots of big challenges ahead as well. Paula, have you got any final thoughts on what we've discussed and what Jean has said just then?
No, I do believe what Jean has said is correct. I think the stories that the players around that time have to tell. I haven't spoken to Margaret or any of those girls 50 years, even plus, and just leave us in the room for 2 seconds, and the fun and the laughter. And we got on really well together, from what I can remember. Not on the pitch, obviously, but off the pitch. And I think maybe the young people of today should listen to the older folk and maybe learn from us. You know, maybe it's just got too serious. Maybe it should just chill out and enjoy the matches more. But I can assure you, none of them today would be going around stands with buckets trying to finance their team or their gear. That I do know. None of the young girls today would put up with that, and they're right. I fully agree with it.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I guess the final question from me, and maybe one of the panel can jump in. I think we've given a nod towards it as you've spoke. You know, we've had a lot of reflection, analysis into the past, but and Paula's given us a bit of insight to, you know, chill, relax, enjoy it. But what else can we learn from the past in terms of trying to influence the present day and the future of the game?
I think it's also just the history. So I've put into the chat about the 2020 campaign in Ireland. So that's to improve women's participation in sport by 20%, their attendance at women's events by 20%, and 20% more media coverage. Because a lot of times, no matter what women's events are going on in Ireland, a lot of it didn't get covered in the media. And so people don't see it as legitimate or as having the same credibility as men's sport. And also just thinking that it's new rather than actually having this really long history. So by promoting the history and making people more aware of actually what was going on, it kind of helps improve the support for the sport. So like the 2020 campaign slogan is, if you can't see it, you can't be it. But if you don't know it, you also can't be it as well. You need to know kind of that there were people there before them, and you can learn lessons from the past. So with women's soccer, there's a lot of stopping and starting, but by looking back and knowing the history of how it developed, the challenges that they had to overcome to be able to even play the sport in the first place, kind of then gives you a better understanding of why it's not at the same place as maybe men's soccer is as well, because they didn't have as many barriers to go through as the women did to play the sport. So it's really important to reflect on that history and understand the challenges that they've overcome, and you can learn lessons from them when you come across them again in the future.
Brilliant, thanks Helena. And as you were talking, I could just hear the song in my head, and if you know your history, and it makes perfect sense for looking ahead. So this is by no means to draw this to a close, but just to formally thank each individual panel member for their time, insight, expertise, research, and most importantly, just giving up their time to share. Paula sharing her story, and our other panel members sharing their research and insight. You know, it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everyone who's joined us would agree. And actually, it'd be really fascinating to hear some of the other stories and listen into some of the conversation now. So I guess what I want to do is draw it to a close. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the Football Collective, we'll share the video and recording later today. But I just want to give this opportunity now just to people to turn the mics off and ask questions and have a discussion and conversation. And yeah, I'm going to mute and step back and let people catch up. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
So I'm going to unmute Margaret.
Yep.
Can you hear us?
I can.
Hello.
Yes, we can.
We're here.
Come on
Yeah.
now.
Margaret, can you hear me?
Yes, I can,
Yes.
Paula.
Were you in goals that day?
Yes.
But
I
you-
was the centre half.
You weren't in goals.
No, I weren't in goals. I was centre half.
You were centre half. And who was in goals?
Chris Miller.
Chris Miller. She hasn't been in the conversation, no.
No.
And
No, she's
Jan,
not.
did Jan play?
Yes.
Yeah, Jan was played against Eusebio.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Is that Eusebio on our team?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hang on.
I played right full back,
So you were marking Eusebio.
and I was marking her. And I wondered ever what happened to her, because I only saw her briefly in the news cutting. But yeah, she was one of your good players, and I didn't know that you'd sort of like recruited the best all over your country.
No, start there a little second. Just Dublin. Listen.
Okay, she's in my pocket for 90 minutes.
It didn't really matter who we recruited. You still won.
Yeah. Oh, well, I know, but we didn't.
I know, you were brilliant. You were brilliant.
Paula, can I ask a question here? Larry McCarthy is my name. I'm based
Hi,
in
Larry.
New York. Who was Eusebio?
She was a girl called Stella Clark, who played for the All-Stars, a coloured girl, which she was the only coloured girl in those days that I can remember ever played.
Right.
And we just got her down from Dublin along with the Williams girls, and there was one other girl, I can't think of her name. I think we'd about 4 players from Dublin.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what
that was in the late 60s, right?
Yes.
So that would have been just after the 1966 World Cup, where Eusebio had made such an impression in England.
Correct. Sure, we all called her Eusebio.
Right.
You know, I actually seen photographs. I was going through my scrapbook the other day, and I was looking at photographs when they were in Prestatyn, and Eusebio had one of the girls on her shoulder, and then there was another one on top of it, and them singing their heads up, and we were after getting trounced. You know, it was. I suppose I don't really have an awful lot of memories, but as the thing is developing, things are coming back to me a little. Do you know what I mean? Because we were all very young at the time.
I don't remember
to
now.
answer you about Stella.
What age girls were you? What around that time? I was 17. I was 2 months off 17, so I was 16.
Then I was 24, I think.
I was 22.
That's why you beat us, you see. You're too much experience. you're way ahead of the posse.
I was 16.
16. Really?
Oh, yeah, you were only a kid, weren't you, John?
Yeah.
You're only a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. You and I were only babies. That's exactly what it was. That's what happened.
Yeah. That's why I couldn't remember the score, John.
I can't. I don't know where they got the 8-1 from. You can tell them that, but that's definitely
it was a late goal that was disallowed.
And two of the other goals that you scored were offside. So where do you go in that case? I think you only beat us 4-1, really.
I don't even know who scored.
I think the 8th goal come from a last minute 30-yard right-footed screamer from myself. And
I'll tell you something. You're not listening. There wasn't an 8th goal.
No. I'm sorry.
So what do you go to matches now, or what do you do with your lives, or what are you? Were you involved in any clubs? Did you do any coaching or anything like that?
When I left Corinthians, I had a daughter who was a teenager, and there was quite a few of her friends that lived on an estate that were getting up to no good.
Okay.
And so I put this idea into my head that I would get them all together and play football.
Right.
And for the 2 or 3 years that we did it, we joined a league. And them girls were absolutely brilliant, and they kept off the streets, and they absolutely loved playing football. But obviously circumstances after that, I had to give it up. But it almost feels like an achievement in my part that I took them girls off the streets.
And it was an achievement.
Yeah.
We were very blessed, actually.
Yeah.
Very
yeah.
blessed. Our captain on the day was a girl called Marie Conway. Now, she coached a team. Both Marie and I lived in an area called Bay Estate in Dundalk. She took on the team of under 14s, and I took on the girls' team under 10s. And the first year, I think we were being hammered 13-0, 12-0. It didn't really matter. We just kind of instilled it into them. The following year, we went on to win the league and the cup. The team Marie coached, a girl called Linda Crowe, went on to represent Ireland of 14.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
When we were delving back, we were trying to get some history for Helena and trying to see could we put our heads and remember something. She said, do you know what? We forgot that we'd an international player on the wee teams we coached.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Would you go to? Sorry.
Go on.
Would you go to the games now? Would you go to games? Would you go to any of the ladies' matches?
Oh, we do some of the Remand City ladies we've been to.
You'd follow
and we were going to go to United until this coronavirus came in, and that was cancelled.
Yes.
So, yes, we do go now and again. But the problem was when it was played in the warmer months, it was fine. But now it comes to the winter months.
No.
Sometimes it's freezing cold, and you think, oh, I can't,
Actually,
you know.
ladies, at this stage of our lives, we have to look after ourselves.
Yeah, precisely.
So,
Well, I'd just like to say what Jean said at home, and I think it's true. Out of all the conversations, I picked up the bit where she said it's important to get all the memories of our women's football, because in a few years we might not be here. 3 have already passed away in that current team that played against you. So it's vitally, vitally important that all these writers get in touch and get as much information as they can. And I thought the meeting that we had at the Football Museum, where everybody got together, like we are getting together with you now,
right?
That's when the conversations flow. That's when the memories come back. And that's when you get all the stories, all the fun, all the drama of all the matches that have been played. Because once we go, then
it's history.
That's another era that's gone missing.
I think we have to give credit to Helena, Jean, and
definitely
with all the research that they're doing. Like, I mean, it's given me such an interest this past, especially with this coronavirus. Like, you know, it's really occupying our minds and bringing us back to when we were playing it. I really, truthfully, whether I have Alzheimer's or what, I don't know. I remember very little.
Oh, I don't.
We can't.
Do you not think that's because we played so many games, or we played so many different sports, or we were involved with so many different teams? It's hard to remember.
Well, we're talking about 50 years ago, and we were playing games every week, every other week. And how do you differentiate? How do you remember every game? How do you remember what the score was, who scored? And unless it's a really, really significant match, like we had in the Reims final when we beat Juventus 1-0, it's very difficult to remember the matches as much as you would like to.
Yes.
No,
but, I'm hearing everything you're saying there. I agree entirely. The one, even though John didn't really like it too much, the one that stands out in my memory was my first international match.
Yes.
In Prestaten, and I remember that distinctly, very clearly.
Yeah.
And I remember the results, John, if you're still listening.
Oh, I can remember. It was 3-2. I interviewed the manager, a gentleman called Gray Phillips, and he was actually a policeman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he was the first Wales women's manager. And the funny thing was, I mean, when I spoke to him, he was 88.
Oh my God!
But he remembered you.
John, is that?
I'd like to say what he said. I'd like to say what he said about what happened when you scored that third goal, but I think we'd be taken off the air.
It's Patricia here. I've got a question for Paula, if you wouldn't mind.
No problem.
Paula, I obviously knew Kevin because he used to come to WFA meetings. What happened to him? I know he's passed away, but did he stay in women's football?
No, when actually the Dundalk team, and although he was very involved with the international team, Kevin. He was very involved with the international team. I honestly don't know how long after that he stayed in, because I had my own children and I left then. My last game was against England, and that was in late 70s, I'd say, or early 70s maybe.
Yeah, we were always playing you at that time because regionally, UEFA, when the competition was started, they would put us into regional groups. Right. So we were ever playing the two islands.
Yes, well, I remember what stands in my memory is the people in Prestaten. I think I stayed in one of the players' homes, and the families were just beautiful, very much on the same par as the Irish, very welcoming, and I've nothing but fond memories of our games in Wales. nothing but fond memories.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks. It's been good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice to speak to everybody.
Right, Margaret, maybe in our time we all might meet up sometime.
Well, we hope so. When this is over, we'll try and arrange something.
As soon as this
virus
isolation is over and we can all roam freely, we have every intention of coming over to meet you all.
Please God, I think it might be some time yet, but hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Okay.
And thanks to everybody that's taken part, especially Jean, Eleanor, and without them, nobody would know about us.
So we are all going. Jean, thank you. Thanks a million, Jean.
Yeah, thanks, Jean.
Thanks, Jean.
Well, it's really thanks to Helena. It was her idea to have the reunion around this. And I know she's had a bit of a tough week and a tough couple of weeks. So really all I did was twisted her arm and say, you won't get the media involved unless you have some kind of event, even if it's on Zoom. And I know, you've been great in encouraging us. And even though you'd not used Zoom before, again, absolutely so much thanks to John, who's been very supportive coming along to the reunions in person and, with information and support. And also to Dan, who, his wife works in the NHS, and I know he's a family person. So him actually giving up a Sunday afternoon is quite a big deal. Yeah. You guys know that I do this for fun, so it's actually my wedding anniversary this afternoon.
Happy
anniversary.
Yeah, so I'd better actually go because I don't want it to be my last wedding anniversary.
Thanks for everything, Jean.
Not for a while anyway.
Thank you, Jean.
Take care, bye.
Thanks one and all.
Bye.
Paula.
Yes.
Before you go, do you hear tell of a guy called Tommy Smith from Knockbridge?
I heard of him. My daughter doesn't live too far from there now, to be honest with you. She lives in Loud Village.
Right. No, the reason I ask is he has made a huge career as a soccer out here with ESPN.
All right, where did you say you were?
I'm in New York.
New York, right, okay.
And I invited him on this conversation this morning, but he hasn't appeared. Now that he's probably technologically challenged like the rest of us. But he's fascinated by Dundalk soccer. He's fascinated by everything that's happening around soccer in that era of the League of Ireland. So I was just wondering, did you ever hear tell of him? Because he is from Knockbridge.
I think Tommy Smith, did he actually play soccer himself?
He did a little bit, yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think I know him. I vaguely know him. I wouldn't know him to talk to, but I did hear of him.
Yeah,
I think he actually, Tommy Smith, actually, if I'm thinking right, played a lot of the indoor football here in Dundalk.
Yeah, he would have. There you go.
Well, I will bow out now, and I do want to have a pleasure speaking to each and every one of you, especially you, John. Seeing you remember the 3 goals.
Yeah, no, you're welcome.
Jan, lovely talking to you, and Steve, you didn't say too much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So,
Thank
Daniel,
you so much.
thank
Take
you.
care, all.
And my sincere congratulations to Helena. I can't sing her praises high enough. She's done wonders for ladies football here in Dundalk as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Helena.
Oh, thanks. And I have to thank everybody else as well, because I can't do it on my own. When you're researching the history, even in one country, you need to look at what's happening in other countries as well. I'm with the support of everybody else. So like Jean, John, and then Gary James, who couldn't join us today, but also Dan as well. Thank you for facilitating this and putting it on to the Football Collective. It's been brilliant.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. Thanks, Helena. Thanks for everything.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks. Thank you.
Bye, Steve.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Margaret. Bye.